Hi everyone. Hi everyone, and welcome to this online event. This webinar is offered to you by the GBU Student Association, GBU Torino Student Association, one of the many associations recognized by the Politecnico and University of Turin. You're very welcome. My name is Lawrence. I'm graduated in engineering, electronic engineering, by the way, from the Polytechnic of Turin. And I'm a volunteer, a senior volunteer for this student association. GBU Torino, as a student association, has two main subgroups, one Italian-speaking and the other English-speaking. This will be repeated, but tonight the event is all in English, and tomorrow will be all in Italian. So in case you want to share with your friends. GBU Torino, maybe you already know, but it's useful to repeat, has a long history of events arranged inside the university. We arranged the conferences in presence before the pandemic, filling up classrooms, more than 500 students attending the events. And however, due to the current limitation with the pandemics, we had to learn how to host online events like the one we are hosting tonight. We started already last year doing some webinar on Zoom. It was about, some was about time management, stress management, something useful for the students. And other times we tried to investigate topics more intriguing, like intelligent design, Big Bang, and science versus religion. You will hear more about this later on. So we invited to you, many of you, via email or social posts, and the response was so big, more than hundreds and hundreds of students writing to us to attend events, that we decided for the first time to arrange not a Zoom call, but a webinar that is in streaming tonight on YouTube. And it will be recorded and will be even available later in case you want to share with your friends. So I hope you will enjoy. We hope you will enjoy as we enjoy to arrange this event. We are a student association. We are volunteers. So I apologize in advance in case of technical issues. We will try to address them and fix them as soon as possible. But in case you see me as an engineer, I will try to help with the other people in the background of this streaming to help a little bit. Let me now introduce one of the students, member of the GBU Torino Association, that is Livia. Welcome, Livia.
Hi, Lawrence. Hi, everyone. My name is Livia. I'm from Brazil, and I study linguistics. I've known GBU for a long time, and GBU doesn't exist only in Turin. It's all over Italy and also all over the world. And what we do here, we have weekly events, and GBU is run by Christians, but we're open to people from all faith or even no faith. And we have two groups in Turin. We have one in Italian. So se ti aspettavi in italiano, sei un giorno in anticipo, sarà domani. But anyway, we're on English. I was just explaining that in Italian, it will be tomorrow. Before starting our event, Anxiety in Zona Rossa, let me just remind you, explain to you how you can make questions. So basically, there should be a link here on the description of the YouTube video, and you just click on the link, and then you can type your question, and then you can send your question. So you can type your name, but if you're anxious about showing your question and your name, you just don't put anything, and it goes anonymously. But anyways, let me talk about Paul Chetfield. So Paul is so qualified, like he has a lot of degrees. I wrote down his degrees in case I forgot, and I just have some of them. Like he studies mathematical sciences by the University of Oxford. He studied biometry by the University of Reading. He studied psychology by the University of Oxford. And there's some people struggling with 1 degree, and he has a lot. He's so qualified. So, Paul, I will leave it to you.
Thank you, Livia. And I think I've probably also got a degree in how to fail at anxiety. Because in this topic, I have really struggled in my life as well. So I hope some of these comments will come, yes, from academia and statistics, but also I hope from my personal life and my battles that I've had and struggles in working through it. Just to start off with, let me encourage you to go to Slido. If you click on that link, and there are 3 questions there, 3 introductory questions. I'm going to have some interactive parts in this talk to give you a chance to give results, and then I will show that during the session. So if you fill out 3 questions by clicking on the Slido link, it will help you get used to Slido, and then we'll show the results and see how well you did in about a minute or 2. John Milton said this: "The mind is its own place and can make a heaven out of hell and a hell out of heaven." He was writing over 2 centuries ago, and yet he seems to understand us quite well, doesn't he? He knows how the battles of the mind can consume us and hurt us and make even the most glorious places seem awful, or the most awful places seem manageable. But there's something encouraging that if he wrote about this 200 years ago, anxiety is not a new problem. And society has been battling it for ages. And so there is some hope that we can learn some good tricks about anxiety and how to manage it even from the past. It may seem strange, but let me start this conference by saying a little anxiety is actually good for you. If you didn't feel anxious before an exam and you started falling asleep, you're not going to do very well. But a little bit of anxiety, getting the adrenaline and pumping, is good. Like today in Turin, it was raining, and a little bit of rain is good for Turin. It takes all of the impurities out of the air you can breathe. But if it rains for weeks on end, like it often does in England, it's not good. And that's the same with anxiety. If it continues and we're constantly in a state of alarm, that is then what is not good. So let me start with that. And let me see if any of you have had a chance to reply to any of the questions. Okay, so the polls are just coming up at the moment. People are still filling them out. So as you just keep on filling, I will keep on going with my talk and share a couple more things. One thought right at the start, just a practical comment for any who suffer with panic attacks. This guy, Harry Barry, has worked for over 30 years as a doctor specializing in anxiety. And he says he's tried all sorts of approaches. And in the end, one of the most helpful things he says to people who struggle with panic attacks is to repeat to themselves this phrase: symptoms of anxiety are uncomfortable, but not dangerous. So if you struggle with panic attacks and you're in the moment, he would say, remember and learn this phrase and say it to yourself over and again. Symptoms of anxiety are uncomfortable, but not dangerous. And hopefully that will just give you the help you need in the moment, just to calm down and return to the moment when you can begin to face up to what is going on. Okay, have we had any results on the questions as yet? We're still filling in. Can we have a look at the first question? I'll ask the tech team to bring that up. We'll see how we're doing on the first one. So just coming back. The first question should be, who is more likely to suffer from an anxiety disorder? Okay, so we've had 17 replies so far, going for it's the same. And then we've got women, and not many people think men struggle with anxiety. I am clearly an outlier as I struggled with it. A number are still replying. Well, the answer is not the most common one. The answer is actually that women struggle the most with anxiety. They struggle more than 3 times as likely to have an anxiety disorder as men. Very interesting. Let's go to the second question and see how you managed with that. Which age group struggles the most with anxiety during this pandemic? Nobody thinks old people or preteens or children, and the most popular answer is students. And you are right. You are right to feel you're struggling with it. I'm not entirely sure why. I wonder if because students not just have exams, but many of them have just left home, whereas perhaps teenagers have the support of a family around them, whereas students are working out how to live on their own. And so during the pandemic, it's particularly strong, that sensation. Brilliant. Let's go on to the third question and see how you dealt with that. Third question, anxiety disorders are amongst the easiest mental health issues to resolve, true or false? An overwhelming majority is saying false to that question. And the answer is true. And actually, this gives me hope because the answer is true. It is possible to make progress with anxiety. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this lecture for you was to give you hope that it can be dealt with, that it can be beaten. So my talk structure today will look like this. Firstly, how to understand your anxiety. Secondly, how to face it or how to deal with it. So 2 subpoints to deal with the first one. How do you know that you're anxious? And then what causes it? You may say to me, well, how do you know you're anxious? Surely that's really obvious. I see the effects in my life. But actually, let me suggest that you probably see the maximum effects when you have a panic attack. You say, I'm struggling with anxiety. But do you realize the preceding signs that happen? One of the tasks I learned to do as I was dealing with my problems with anxiety was not just learn when it was at the peak and it was at its worst, but also the stages that came before it. So for me, when I was at my peak, I would implode. I would get ill and I don't get better as I should. Everyone at their peak either explodes or implodes. They either get it all out and they might attack people like a bull seeing a red flag, or they can implode and hurt themselves. For me, I was laid flat on a bed for months, unable to get better. For some people, it can be panic attacks. I've had them earlier in my life as well. But what happens before it? Well, for me, that sign, I had this brain fog. I couldn't see and think clearly, inability to make decisions. I had backache, tiredness quite severely. And then before that, I would get a cold. This is often the first signs I began to notice my anxiety. Perhaps a sniffle, and I would always be sneezing. But when I was trying to get better, the psychologist who was helping me encouraged me to look for the earlier signs. And I began to notice, actually before that, I get restless, really hyperactive. I don't want to stop doing activities. I take more things on because I'm not feeling at peace enough. I'm feeling anxious. I'll try to add more in. My sleep can get affected. My stomach feels tense. And then even earlier, I noticed the speed of thoughts in my head goes crazy. I'm impatient. I begin to realize my anxiety. But actually, it took me a while to realize I've even got an earlier step than that. And it's this. I have this nervous cough that just goes like, and you may notice me doing it this evening because it's my first sign that I'm anxious. The reason I'm sharing this with you is that if you can notice earlier signs, you can begin to react more quickly to your anxiety before you get to stage 6. If you only pay attention at the later stages, your body will have to give you dramatic signs to get your attention. Whereas if you notice the earlier signs and start reacting earlier, you can catch it more early. If you don't know what your earlier signs are, one thing you can do is talk to your parents if you live at home, or if you live in a shared house, sometimes asking your friends. They might know, if they're quite well in tune with you, signs when you're anxious. And that could be a good way just to explore, how can I make sense? How can I find those first signs of anxiety for me? So that's the first thing. Second thing, we'll come on to that in a second. I want you to notice what causes you anxiety. And again, I would love you to go on to Slido. So if you click on Slido, there's now going to be a word cloud. And I want you to describe in one word the main emotion you felt during COVID. Don't use the word anxiety because we're using that for this conference, but try and think of another emotion that perhaps sums up how you felt in this time. Psychologists often say it's really helpful to be able to name what you're going through. So I hope we'll generate a number of those, and I'll share the results again in a minute. While you do that and you get a chance to feedback and work out what stresses you, and it should be helpful during this time of COVID. There are a number of things I found quite okay. I've been okay with talking to people and sharing my heart of what's hard, listening to people struggling, but I found it really hard reading these guidelines from the government, DPCM, and trying to work out. For me, reading the legal stuff is so boring, and that's been hard. So see if you can identify one word, what it is. And let me share a couple of thoughts that might help you just make sense of this last year. This is a graph of how we go through crises. The y-axis shows the emotional highs when we're feeling good, and then the emotional lows at the bottom. So the red line starts on the left, and it shows that as disaster is coming, there's a warning. Perhaps in February 2020, we heard about COVID. There's a threat, and then there's the impact. And this graph was set up just for a one-off impact, whereas we've had an ongoing one. But it still fits quite well what we're going through. As lockdown hits, we realise it's serious and we're in trouble. Humanity's natural reaction to crisis is then this heroic stage or honeymoon. And you say, well, what on earth was that? Well, if you remember in the first lockdown, people were going on their balcony and playing music. People were standing and applauding in some countries. There were signs of, we can manage this, we are strong, and lots of signs of heroism, and we're with you, and support on social media. But then that tails off quite quickly. And it didn't happen in Italy in the second or the third lockdown. It was just at the start of the crisis. Then this really sets in this period, which we've been in for much of the last year, of disillusionment, discouragement, a bit of frustration. One article in the New York Times that came out recently described where we're at now as languishing. We're just a bit tired and deflated, almost giving up, just accepting it's hard. But let me give you hope. This model also anticipates that there will be a time of working through, and it says grief, because it's like we've lost a year, and that's a part of our life which has not been good. And then rebuilding does start. And hopefully we are now going to start that process of rebuilding as we come out of lockdown. Just another psychological example, and then we'll look at your emotions that you described. This is taken from firefighting, but I found this so helpful to think about how are you coping during times of lockdown. I thought, oh, I'm probably doing fine. It's like a traffic light system. I'm probably green. I'm thriving. And then as I was reading through surviving and struggling, I noticed at the bottom of struggling, it said self-medicating with substances, food, or other numbing activities. And I thought, yeah, I've been eating a fair bit of chocolate. And I thought, oh, that's a classic sign of somebody who's struggling. And this just made me feel a bit more patient with myself. Actually, this is a normal reaction to a time of crisis. Many people are in the orange, the exhaustion. Many people have felt a lack of energy to do things. This is just a normal reaction to what we're going through. So don't be too hard on yourself if you're feeling that. This is completely in line with normal models of crisis. Okay, so I just want to see if we've got up the any words or any emotions on our word cloud. So if our tech team can bring that up, we'll see what we've got. Okay, yes, fear, a big one. Uncertainty, great word. Anger, that's a really good word because we got angry at people, and we do get angry, who don't respect the guidelines as well. Suddenly we get really angry with them. As well as the lockdown, we have to have boredom, out of control, numb, brilliant word. Solitude. Yeah, that's been one of my biggest issues. As a single guy, long way away from my family in England, I've just really missed my friends. It's so important in dealing with difficult issues. Frustrating depression. Yeah, brilliant suggestions. Thank you for that. Okay, great. So let's come on. That was just the start of how to understand and think about your anxiety. Secondly, how to face it. And we're going to look at this physically and then mentally. So physically, how do we deal with this? Well, there's a few simple ways. Keeping up good exercise, keeping a healthy diet as well as you can, sleeping well, making sure you do look after yourself with sleep. If you're sleeping well, it will help you deal with things and play. All of these things have in common one thing, and that is they're undermining the fact that you're in a state of crisis. Imagine that you're running away from a lion. You are not thinking about exercise. You are not thinking about having a good diet or having enough sleep or playing. You are completely focused on, I need to run away from this lion that is chasing me. In the same way with COVID, by being shut in and locked away, society said there's a massive danger. But there is a risk, and many mental disorders, psychologically speaking, come when our body gets stuck in a state of emergency instead of realizing we can return to a state of calm. A state of emergency, we just feel we need adrenaline, more and more of that. All of these activities are trying to remind us, actually, okay, but it's okay. I can exercise. Can take time to eat well, to sleep, and to be stupid, to play. It's harder when you're stuck at home, but people have discovered Scribble and things like that and being creative. So these physical things are good ways to undermine that anxiety. Secondly, ground yourself. We're not just brains that think, we're brains and body, head and heart, if you like, body and soul, some people would put it, or mind, body and mind. And actually, some simple activities like stroking your pet cat if you have one, or a dog, they're just helping you recognize that you've got a physical body, controlling your breathing, taking deep breaths, just to relax you. There are things, all sorts of approaches online to do with dealing with anxiety, dealing with the body, and tapping and working with the vagus nerve. And they're all attempts to kind of get you to notice how your body's doing. And one interesting one that actually we can do being online, but I probably wouldn't do with you if we were in person, is actually something which has got all sorts of names: body scanning, orienting, centering, and recently it's called mindfulness, I guess. Is this approach of focusing in on your body. But all I've done there is just drawn your attention gently to different parts of the body to remind you you're not just a set of thoughts here driven by your mind, but your body as well. There's a lot of work in psychology balancing out your mind with your heart, your head and your heart. If you're all head, you ignore your body can often give you these physical complaints like you're not listening to me. And that can lead to various psychological issues. It can be an issue with depression, with chronic fatigue, with a number of things. If you just follow your body, that is equally imbalanced. You can become very unstable. You can become a hypochondriac. But they're there for us to work together. So if that helps you in some way, feel free to check out mindfulness, something like that, to make sure you're not just being driven by all your ideas that you want to achieve, but that you're noticing the physical side of anxiety as well. So that's physical approaches. Secondly, working on your thoughts. And I'm going to deal with 3 approaches here. One, a classical psychological approach called CBT, another, an alternative, and then a third, a spiritual approach. CBT is already shown scientifically to help with anxiety. So you might wonder, why even bother with looking at other approaches? The reason is that though it helps a bit, and many people want a bit more. So let's have a look at all 3 approaches. Firstly, CBT. And here's an example of how it would encourage you to work through your thoughts. I've chosen to do it for an exam, though I very nearly did it just for COVID. But it's the same approach. So you might think in your head, what if I fail an exam? CBT says, aha, notice how you're distorting reality. You're already predicting the worst outcome. Whereas a more realistic thought would be, I haven't failed an exam before, or I don't normally fail an exam. I know at Polytechnic some of the exams are very hard, so it's improbable I'm going to fail these. Building on this, a second thought could be, if I fail an exam, or this exam, it would be a disaster. And again, it's exaggerating the situation a bit. If I fail an exam, I'll have to do it again, but that's okay. Or a third thought, if I have a panic attack, I will surely fail all my exams. You see how you're both exaggerating and distorting reality, jumping to false conclusions. And again, CBT would work on going, well, no, it would be uncomfortable, at home attack. It's not likely to make you fail all your exams. So CBT works a lot at trying to notice these cognitive distortions and correct them. There's a brilliant PDF that I shared with the tech team that they'll now share on the group, which gives an example of 15 cognitive distortions. I couldn't fit it on the slides so that you could all read, so here's just a few of them. Imagining the worst we've seen, exaggerating, seeing things only from your perspective, a classic one in conflict management. You think that you see it correctly and right, and others can't see that. Just being aware that perhaps you're not seeing it all perfectly can be helpful. Massive one, filtering comments to hear only the negative ones. It's so easy, isn't it? After you present something, perhaps in class, people will say lots of positive things, but one person says something negative and you go away and you just remember that. But that's a form of distortion. Just remembering that negative and not remembering the positive things said. And then there's many others that could be looked at. Okay, so those are the main ones. Let's move on to the Linden Method. And this is an alternative approach, and it's a bit controversial, as you might be able to see. Firstly, they say stop visiting every practitioner you can find. Okay. Talk to your doctor about stopping medication if you're on that. So you can already see that this is quite radical in its approach and controversial. I wouldn't ever recommend that to people. Stop researching anxiety. Only follow this method. I mean, this is incredibly exclusive. It's not even told you what the method is yet. Stop talking about your condition of anxiety and stop leaning on other people and depending on them. So the first 6 steps are just saying, listen to me. You can see perhaps why it's so controversial and why on Amazon there are some people that are like 5 stars and there's a number that are like 1 star. Very controversial. 7, don't hold on to memories of your condition. It doesn't want you to replay that you'll always be there with whatever aspect of anxiety you could struggle with. And then they say, and this is at the heart of their practice, divert your mind. Make it your new habit, always. And this is called in other psychological approaches the stop technique. And the idea is as soon as you notice an anxious thought, go stop, interrupt it, and replace it with another thought. So one person I was following on YouTube, actually, reckons she sees this as really effective in curing anxiety. She said, think of something you love doing. What is that? She gets the person to tell them. Then she said, right, now tell me the last time you were anxious. And they start, she goes, stop. She said, now think about that thing that you like doing that you're telling me about earlier. She's like, now do that every time you struggle with anxiety. And this is very much the heart of the Linden Method. Try and interrupt those thought patterns. And it's quite similar to CBT. It's stopping those thoughts from going round and round and interrupt them drastically. It's often quite helpful, but emotionally these approaches can be a bit tiring. That's the flip side of them. So both of these approaches really have looked at trying to interrupt those thought processes you have. So let's go on and let's look at a spiritual approach. And I want to take a passage from the Bible and use that as a basis to talk about perhaps how spirituality tries to face this issue of anxiety. So here's a passage from the Bible. It says this: do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things and the God of peace will be with you. So what do I notice here? Well, first, notice the emphasis on working on your thoughts, just as CBT, just as the Linden Method. Whatever is true, honourable, just, pure, lovely, think about these things. It's almost trying to interrupt the anxious thoughts and go, think about this instead. Secondly, there's a very interesting part which talks about what you've heard and learned and received. Practice these things. Just in the days running up to this conference, as I was thinking about what to say, I remembered the importance of not letting anxiety change your life too much. Part of the importance of doing exercise, eating well, sleeping, having fun, is that you're showing your body you don't need to be in this state of emergency, you can be also in this state of calm. And actually, as I was preparing for this, I was like, I should probably not see people. And then I remembered, no, exactly the thing I need to do to deal with any anxiety I might have about this talk is to continue my life as normal. So I kept on doing some other issues to do with work. And part of that's reminding myself this is just part of some of the things I'm doing. It's okay, I don't need to create ridiculous amounts of space. And that's always the temptation with anxiety. The passage also mentioned peace. We're talking a lot about combating anxiety. But certainly here, there's a positive aspect that I'm not really going to touch on much tonight, which is about how to search positively for peace. Third thing, thanksgiving. Idea of thanking God or just being thankful is very useful. There's one study by Emmons and McCulloch, I believe, who did a study on what's the best way to be thankful. And they looked at two approaches. One, to write a letter to someone who has been a really important person in your life. A detailed letter to them, perhaps once every month as a practice, or to just give thanks, be thankful. Name 3 things that you're thankful for. And they found that the best approach, according to the research, was to just name 3 things you're thankful for. Again, very interesting. And then fourth, here, notice again, don't be anxious, but it talks about prayer, making your request be known to God. And I thought as I was studying this, so is this passage in the Bible, is spirituality just a 2,000-year-old version of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT? Is it just the same approach as these psychological approaches we have now? Is it covering the same ground? Well, someone went there and asked that question before me, Bartowski and his 2 colleagues. And he asked, well, do we need religion, or do we just stick to these helpful kind of spiritual practices? So mindfulness is the secular version of meditation. They've taken out anything extra and they're just focusing on that being present. So can we just work on the spiritual without religion? Unfortunately, his results showed that it didn't work as well. So then I started asking, well, why not? Why does the data show that being religious in some way helps or adds more to just having a few spiritual practices? And I found a couple of thoughts. Firstly, there's an Italian town in the US called Rossa. And this is, it became a real focus for exactly this question, because the inhabitants there would drink so much alcohol, they would smoke like crazy, they have awful diets, they would eat loads of butter and fat, cheese, and all sorts of things. And basically, There was nothing in their diet that meant they should have lived very long at all, working dangerous jobs as well. And yet they had a higher life expectancy than the rest of the United States. They researched like, but why? They shouldn't be living long at all. And so they studied this town and they noticed that these people were always involved in each other's lives. They were really interconnected. And they deduced that actually the key aspect that was helping them so much was the power of their community. And so a couple of things made me think here. Well, firstly, yeah, I guess that makes sense. I mean, this last year has been so hard because we've not had community. We've all been cut off and isolated, and that's so unnatural. But the second thing was that actually you don't need to be religious to have community. You can try and find a good group of friends. So I was like, okay, perhaps that's why. But as I searched the academic literature, I came up with a second issue. It seemed if you're clear on the meaning to life, you have a purpose in life, often a religious one, that seems to undermine anxiety. And so I began to think, well, what are the main causes of anxiety? And there's research on this as well. So here are the 4 main anxieties from a paper in 2016. They said this: there's fear of the unknown, fear of negative evaluation, perhaps by people around you, fear of pain, and fear of death. Perhaps COVID would enter into fear of the unknown, perhaps fear of pain and fear of death as well. And wouldn't it be good if there was a way to not be afraid of the unknown? Someone put in the word cloud. Wouldn't it be good if we weren't so afraid of what others thought of us? If we didn't fear being hurt by other people, we didn't fear death so much. And you could see how this is now touching really on some spiritual issues. And so what if we were to think about who or what perhaps one of the leading spiritual gurus in the world would say to this? A leader valued by Muslims, Jews, Christians, Hindus. How would Jesus engage with this? Well, firstly, I think he's lived them all. Fear of the unknown. If you read about him in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's praying like crazy, he's panicking, he doesn't want to go forward, he looks in an awful state. He knew what it was to have people criticize him negatively. He certainly got hurt, whipped and beaten and nailed to a cross, and he died. So he lived these. But interestingly, he said people that follow him as well would get freedom from these. So he talked about how you wouldn't fear the unknown because you can know there's a God in control. His message was that actually other people's voice won't hurt you so much because you'll get a new identity. He will give you a new identity. And like he would talk about crazy ideas like being born again. It was such a radical change. Fear of being hurt by people, again, linked in with your new identity, not as big. And then death, well, I guess his main claim was that he broke through death in the resurrection. And so he claims he could help people through that. And just imagine if you believed that, if you followed him, imagine what that would do to your anxiety. Imagine if you knew that there wasn't anything to fear from death, because it had broken its power and it would take you to paradise. Imagine that actually you weren't so worried about what the people around you thought because you cared what he thought. Imagine if you didn't fear the unknown because actually he was in. Can you see how much of a difference that would make? This is then what spirituality can add to the topic of anxiety. So how do you deal with anxiety? You need to understand it, and then you need to face it physically, mentally, spiritually. Thank you for your time. And I'll pass you back to Livia, and I believe we are in for a time of question and answer.
Can you guys hear me now? Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you, Paul. And yeah, I'm less anxious now. Okay, so before going to Q&A, I'll just remind you how you can ask questions. So here on the description, you find a link and you click there and you can ask your question. You can also vote a question if you feel like you're going to ask that. So if you vote, the question will be more highlighted for us here. You can also type it at the chat here on the live. Yeah, and if you want to know more about our group, you can follow us on Instagram. You just type GBU Torino International Students, GBU Torino International Students, and you find out about our events. We meet every Monday. So this Monday we have a special event which is really related to this one. Dr. Amy Morgan will be talking to us. She's also studies psychology, and she's gonna be talking to us about how to handle pressure. So yeah, it's kind of related. Yeah, this is our next event. So it's on Zoom. And if you follow us on Instagram, GBU Torino International Students, you can direct message us and we'll send you the link. Yes, so do we have any questions? If we don't have any questions, you're going to have to entertain us, Paul. Okay, I see a question here. So this person is asking, I found my study productivity really dropping during the pandemic. Is that something usually associated with anxiety? And if so, what do you suggest I do?
Thank you for the question. Let me bring up my graph again that I shared on the effect of COVID. Hopefully you can see this now. I looked at the firefighters and how they reacted to crisis. So this is a normal reaction to crisis. And if you have a look under struggling, I highlighted exhaustion as one of the common effects. Part of the reason I think we struggle with being productive is that we're not just machines. Sometimes I wish I was just a machine and I could sit down at my desk and just do everything I want. But we're multifaceted. We need to have fun. We need to play. We need to be serious as well. But if we just try and be focused and serious, it doesn't work. A similar thing happens with exam preparation. If you try to study all day long, you won't manage it and you'll just end up feeling just so dead in your heart. And so I tried something quite novel for exam preparation. I had 100% of my undergrad degree that I did at Oxford in a 2-week period at the end of my third year. And I tried to just study intensely the mornings. I took the rest of the day off to have fun. I played tennis, I did other things. And I did well in those exams. And the Friday before the Monday of my first exam, my professor said to me, "We want you all to take the weekend off." I'm like, "Oh, you're joking. Come on, don't be silly." It's like, "No, serious." It's like, "Look, I've been a professor for 30 years and I know what will help you. If you don't know your material now, you'll never know it. Take it off, relax, and then you'll be able to think clearly in the exam." And part of trying to deal with being productive is making sure we allow ourselves time off. And that's different to, I tried to work today, but I couldn't. That's not time off because you didn't try and relax, you tried to work. So I think sometimes this productivity really dropping can also be because that's the only thing you're doing. And so I would almost suggest you to think about adding other things to your life. one more example and then we'll move on to other questions. I found I often have admin that I need to get done. I do not enjoy admin. But the best way that I can get admin done is actually by making sure I'm doing other activities at work. I'm doing meetings, because then when I come back, I'm charged. I've seen people and I'm happy. In the same way, I would encourage you actually to get involved and do a number of other things. And that will actually make it easier when you then come back to studying, hopefully to be as productive as before. So yeah, that would be nice. Thank you for the question. It's a good question. Great. So do we have another question coming up?
Okay, so yeah, we have a question. So someone's asking, what about bad or fake news surrounding us? They are always on the negative side. How can one feel not sad or stressed about current pandemic? Yeah, that's a good one.
That is a very good one. Yeah. It's not wrong to feel negative emotions. So it's not wrong to feel sad about this pandemic and actually to recognize that. Part of me, if I share my slides again and go back to this graph, hopefully you can see this. One of the reasons I wanted to share this with you is I wanted you to notice actually it's okay to realize that it is quite sad, the time we're going in, and almost to grieve that, because there is a sense of loss. And part of dealing with the challenge of the pandemic is to recognize, okay, actually, it is a hard time. It's not natural for us to be isolated. We're made to be social creatures. So I wouldn't ignore that or minimize it. Rather, I would recognize that's a normal reaction and then take care to do what I can to look after myself in other ways. So for me, I recognized that actually I would probably need a bit more time to deal with my negative emotions. So not to expect that I would produce as much. You know, there's always some people you read about who are like, oh, I took up a new hobby in lockdown and I did this and I did that. I'm like, who are you? Like, how many people react like that? Most of us are going, okay, this is a lot to deal with. This is hard. And we need time to deal with that. So I would say it's okay to recognize that. Don't expect to be at your most productive, but almost don't beat yourself up about it too much. It is a hard time. We've come through something. I mean, I was in the doctor's surgery with a 90-year-old nonna, and she was moaning. She's like, not even in the Second World War was it like this, you know. And so I think it's okay to recognize we've come through and we're coming through a really difficult time, and to be patient with yourself. If you're expecting yourself to be as happy as you were before lockdown, I don't think that's going to happen. Part of what can help with dealing with these things is a spiritual perspective. If you believe there's more to this life, that can help you deal with the difficulty now. I think part of the real crushing reality of this time is, I think our society is almost hoping that this earth would be heaven now. And this lockdown has reminded us that actually suffering has been a regular part of human existence forever, really. And we're almost one of the first generations to almost believe that we can have everything now, you know, be healthy and stay young forever and be fully entertained. And this has just reminded us that actually we were made for more than this. So spirituality comes into a lot of that, and going, well, perhaps actually we were made for something bigger and this earth can't fully satisfy. So I think spirituality would come into that answer as well. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question.
Okay. We have a question. Do you think yoga and meditation help? Are the techniques working?
Yeah, thank you. So yoga, some people would call it just It was interesting, actually. Let me answer these. You put these two together. Let me answer it together. Yoga is perhaps coming out of Hinduism, but then many people will do just exercises, physical movements, stretching, Pilates, and that's been shown to be effective, whether or not you add the spiritual elements. In the same way, mindfulness has come out of meditation and found that it's effective even without the Buddhist extra. So I think both the stretching and the mindfulness are both practices that, when stripped of that background, seem to still do okay. So yeah, I think they're both helpful activities. Other techniques, well, I mentioned this tapping. If you search on the vagus nerve, that's another approach. All of these have to do with trying to get you to connect with your body. You're not just a brain here, but you're meant to be in contact. And I've noticed how I've missed touch. Just nobody touches me anymore. Like, you can't. And as a single guy, I just missed that. And that's part of, we need to be grounded. It's part of why that mindfulness exercise perhaps helped you, if you found that helpful. Part of why, stroking a cat, just playing with a dog can actually just be quite refreshing. It just helps ground you. So yeah, those are a number of techniques that can all help with that physical side of reminding you, getting you out of just your thoughts in your head, getting you into your body. So yeah, that physical side is definitely a helpful part in fighting anxiety. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So next question, any practical tips on how to stop overthinking?
Yeah, good question. There's a number of angles to this. Okay, one is, I find, if you're overthinking, have you stopped feeling what the signs your body is giving to you? I remember talking to a girl with depression. She was referred to me by someone else, and she was really struggling with depression. This other friend of mine was like, I just can't help her. And I met with her, and I noticed her body would signal where the problem was. And I was asking her some general questions, and she had this restlessness that would come when I was getting near the point. And it was a really fun conversation, because I asked her, this physical symptom was coming, so it just helped direct my questions. And within 20 minutes, we had arrived at the heart of the problem that was really underlying some of her battles. And as I got there, I asked her a question, and she's like, I don't want to talk about that. And I was like, oh, yeah. I was like, unless you want to go there, you're probably not going to come through this. I think this is at the root of it. So sometimes it can be trying to work out if there is something underlying it at the root. I would say often the physical approaches are good to get you out of your head and into your body, noticing what those signs are. I think that's really helpful. Spiritual exercises can help. So part of kind of taking rest, and the success perhaps of the more Buddhist meditation has been to remind us to slow down and stop. The Christian idea would be the idea of the day off, 1 in 7, where you decide to do no work, you cut yourself off. Fascinating. If you've seen any stuff by Simon Sinek, he argues one of the challenges, particularly facing millennials, is that we're bombarded by information, and we're so used to being attached to our phones. In the olden days, you would go to school, you'd come home, and you wouldn't hear from your friends till the morning afterwards. So you'd naturally be social for a number of hours, and then you would relax and you'd be at home. With mobile phones, we're constantly connected and constantly whirring. So actually another approach could be to turn your phone off. Do you have digital detox days? What I tend to do is I turn my notifications off on social media. And I just don't look at it. And it's interesting, you relax that bit more deeply. So the principle perhaps of rest could be very helpful. Being mindful of how your body is would be helpful too. And then perhaps consider, feel free to dig, but if you're overthinking already, it might be too much for you to go in that. So rest, turn the phone off. Those can be just a couple of very practical approaches. And do seriously consider this concept of having a day off a week or something like that. I was listening to how Jordan Peterson was trying to communicate this idea with a bunch of bankers. He said they were working ridiculous hours. And I said, look, try and stick to set hours a week. There's no way we can do that. He said, all right, then try and take 4 days off every 3 months. And they looked nervous, but then they tried to do it. He said, and weigh up at the end of the year, who did more hours, those who did it and those who didn't. He said, without fail, those who took the time off did better. They produced more. Because rest is not just allowing you to recover, it stimulates you, it makes you creative. I could say a lot more on that. So do take seriously the principle of rest. We often see it just as a negative thing. It's very positive. I could give you loads of thoughts about that. You can ask me more questions later if you want, but that will do for now.
Yeah, let's see if we have any questions. Okay. What if the worst happens and I fail my exams? How do I cope?
Yeah, so that happens to the best of us. We do. And that's okay. Like, we're never going to get it right all the time. It was asked of the British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, was it true? He was the Prime Minister during the Second World War. Was it true that you failed a year at school and you had to repeat the whole year? And he said, I didn't fail it. I was given a second chance to do it properly. And he was just facing reality and dealing with that. And so I think in the same way, okay, you failed some exams. All right, let's work out what did you find hard? Where were you struggling? Which bits were hardest? Are there any friends who can help you with that? Is there any feedback the teacher could give you? Any parts you're finding particularly difficult? Did you take on too many exams? Should you perhaps try and take on less? I have some friends at Polytechnical who ambitiously try and take on a whole number of exams at the same time and then go, no, I can't manage it. Perhaps they just need to accept they need to go at a slower pace. It doesn't matter if you graduate 1 year later than everybody else. If you graduate, that is a degree, and that still counts. So yeah, I think, again, just be a bit patient with yourself. You want to do the best with the tools you have and who you are. And if that means you need to take it a bit more slowly, so be it. That's fine. Thank you. Good question. Good practical question.
Yeah. Okay, next question. You are suggesting that the Bible helps with stress. So opium of religion? I think violence and sorrow about example, Jesus' story suggests all but peace.
Okay, I think this is probably referring to Nietzsche talked about religion as being the opiate of the people. Yeah, so some people are very scared about that. Interestingly, let me stick with the academic data. So Koenig in 2012 did a meta-analysis of the effect of religion on health. And so this is, he put together over 3,000 studies, only the studies with data from 1870 to 2010. 140 years, every paper published which had an outcome on health. And he put all these papers together to come up with what is the effect of religion on health and well-being. And he found that it reads like a sermon. It's crazy. It's like less problems with anxiety, more optimistic, more driven, less depression, or they recover more quickly. It comes up with crazy things you wouldn't even believe, like less heart problems, and apparently religious people are fitter. I mean, really? Like more physically active? Like I do not have any muscles. I am not a good example of this. So the data seems absolutely comprehensive on that. In terms of, I think, violence, there's the question of violence in that question. Yeah, again, feel free to have a look at the data. There's a book that came out called The Encyclopedia of Wars by, I think it's Grimrod, who analysed all the wars in history over major wars, about 1,776, if I remember correctly. I like numbers, so they tend to stick in my mind. And he looked at how many were due to religion. I wonder, out of all of those, what percentage you think would be due to religion? Because a number of thinkers like to argue religion causes war and all of that. The number due to religion was actually just 7%, of which half of those were caused by Islam and then half by all the other religions put together. So yeah, the data just doesn't really back the popular view, let's say, that religion causes war. And especially, I mean, if you think, I'm not going to defend all religion, but if you just take Jesus' message, if you take seriously what he said you should love your enemies. If you're going to love your enemies, well, it's hard to really fight them, be horrible to them. You need to be respectful and care. And so, actually, I think if you take Jesus' words seriously, it shouldn't be leading to any violence, any abuse of any kind. Quite the opposite. It should lead to freedom of thought. And I think even today, if you look around the world, it's difficult to find many Christian nations that are oppressing people of other worldviews. Whereas I think if you look at most other worldviews, you could probably find places where they're oppressing others. So yeah, I don't think Jesus should lead to anything very violent at all. But yeah, good question. Good question. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Let's see if we have any questions.
Excellent. Does that mean I've solved them all? Does that mean we've resolved it?
All
Brilliant.
anxiety. Oh, we have another question.
Perhaps the last question coming in.
Yeah. So it says, is that Bible verse saying that I can effectively pray my anxiety away? Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, good question. Yes and no. Let me try and I want to deal with this practically because we're struggling with anxiety practically, and I've battled with this practically. There's a danger with prayer and a danger with attempting to clear your mind, that if you don't clear it well enough, the rumination will keep coming back. And there's a danger in prayer that if you don't really get outside of yourself, you can just ruminate. So some people attempt prayer or they attempt clearing their mind, but the thoughts keep coming back in. Or even you could attempt CBT, but then you overthink, and all of that ruminating isn't helpful. So there is a degree in which it's possible to try these approaches, but you just reinforce those thoughts that you're almost trying to get free of. So I remember, to give you an example, one person in a church who would just pray about a situation he was in, and he would just repeat the situation, help me in this situation. But it was like saying, don't think about a pink elephant. Oh, take this pink elephant from me. This pink elephant is terrible. And you could see it was just consuming him. Whereas what good prayer should do is focus you on something else as well. What good clearing your mind should do, and rest is enable you to engage in other activities. So prayer can help, it can make a difference, and positive thankfulness helps you focus on other things. So I think it can help. I think it's too simplistic to say it would just resolve all problems and anxiety. It is not that simple. No one of these approaches is going to solve everything. It's like an armory. If you can take tools from each part of the talk, it should give you a good toolbox with which to face anxiety. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I think this is one last question. So it says, how did you manage anxiety in the worst periods of your life? And what was your secret?
I think there were a couple of different things that helped. When I was struggling with overthinking and being broken, the practical task of noticing my physical symptoms and reconnecting, if you like, the head with the heart helped. But when I was really ill, and I remember I was losing energy and it was going downhill day after day, and there came a day when I was spending more hours unconscious, asleep than conscious. And I began to get the thought, actually, this might be it for me. I might not have any more conscious hours. That then really forced me to kind of face the reality. What if this is it for me? And actually, it was there that really my spirituality kicked in. And the fact that I'd faced and thought about the reality of what next, what comes after this life. And there was a certain peace because I do follow Jesus, and he talks about dealing with death and proving it through his resurrection. And I feel the power of that. So I think that was probably the most comforting thing, that actually, even if I never got better, even if I wasn't going to wake up again one day, that there was peace, that the biggest enemies can actually be dealt with. And therefore I was at peace that whether I got better or not, it was okay. I was covered. So I think for me, my faith in Jesus was really something which comforted me because it helps you in this life and it prepares you for what's to come, when I will have to stand before my Creator. So yeah, I think those two were probably the key things that really helped me in the hardest times. Thank you. And thank you for all your questions. Great questions, from the practical to the philosophical and the difficult. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for the talk, and thanks everybody for the questions. Yeah, that was really interesting. So we would like to know if you liked our live. We would like to have some feedback. If you are subscribed to this webinar, you will receive an email, so you can put your feedback there. But if you're not, we're gonna put a comment here on this live, and please fulfill it and let us know how did you like it. If you would like to know more about GBU, like I said, we're on Instagram, GBU Torino International Students, and you can direct messages for our events and everything. And this Monday, we have another psychologist event, let's say it. It's with Dr. Amy Morgan. It's about how to succeed under pressure, and it's going to be very interesting. It's on Zoom for now, and it's at 8:30 on Mondays. So direct messages for the link. Yes, I think this is it. Thank you very much for everything, Paul. That was very interesting. And thanks everybody for listening to us. So see you next time.
Thank you.